welcome to this Coherence Cookbook podcast series. I'm Terry Gibson and I worked with GNDR on the production of the Coherence Cookbook. This is the second module of 3. In the first we looked at what coherence meant and we looked at a couple of case studies. In this module we're going to look at the roles that CSOs play in coherence locally, and we're also going to look at some of the key success factors that can strengthen coherence. The information which formed the basis of this cookbook and the ingredients and recipes came from organisations like yours. The starting point was work that our development partner, GNDR, did to look at coherence at international and national level. And then we turned from that to consult member organisations of GNDR, inviting them to submit case studies of how they approached coherence in their work. We gathered 73 case studies from all regions, and we performed a qualitative analysis on those to draw out of them key ingredients. We also selected from them some representative case studies which became the recipes in the last part of the cookbook. Alongside that, we conducted field work in the Philippines and in Mexico and met with many local actors and organisations to discuss their experience of the possibilities and challenges concerned with coherence. So the information in this cookbook is based on practical realities and practical experience. We'll see that CSOs play a key role in strengthening local level coherence, and we can think about it through the lens of the project cycle or action cycle, which at its simplest is something which forms the basis of any programme of action. It starts with planning. What's the information we need? How are we going to do this? It moves to implementation, the actual activities, and it's really important that the final stage of this cycle is learning, to understand what's happened, what the effects were, what was unexpected, what didn't work, and that learning needs to be applied in the next stage of this repeating cycle if progress is going to be achieved. So let's think briefly about the roles of CSOs in all those 3 stages. First of all, in planning. A key role that CSOs have in planning is to link together different sources of information and different actors so that a coherent plan can be produced. Now, the last people often listened to are local communities, and that's where CSOs are able to tap into communities, gather them together, build trust with them, and engage in participative activities to gather the knowledge that's held by the community, which is often critical to effective action. CSOs are also bridge builders, and they can link this local action and knowledge to other sources of information and knowledge. So let's look briefly at an example. In Bujumbura in Burundi, there was a problem of unplanned excavation from rivers for construction, which was degrading the environment, and it was also increasing flood risk. To think of an appropriate action plan, the CSO had to gather an understanding of why this was happening and what could be done about it. That involved consulting the local communities and finding out why this was being done. It involved providing information from other sources about the benefits of reforestation and flood prevention. By linking together the local community, establishing action groups and linking them in turn to local government, they were able to develop a plan for a programme of action which involved awareness raising, reforestation and watercourse management to tackle the disaster risk and degradation in the area. So planning involves gathering local information, facilitating participative consultations, linking that to remote and technical information, advocating for linking activities together, connecting disaster reduction, climate change adaptation and sustainable development, and identifying ways of reducing overall vulnerability. When CSOs move from planning to implementation, similarly they need to think about coherent or integrated ways of working. An implementation in practice doesn't involve just working with one group, because there are often many different actors who have an interest, either positive or negative, in how implementation takes place. For example, in Change Falls in Zimbabwe, women were working in self-reliant self-help groups, and to address those challenges, the local organisation built a platform to gather together the different actors. It included local people and it included local government, and it looked at challenges of risk mapping, the risks that people faced, and ways of strengthening local resource generation. The result of this was they improved water access and promoted food production using climate sensitive methods, facilitating integrated action to strengthen local resilience. So implementation starts with providing information and training to engage the different actors who need to be involved in the activity. It involves mobilising a range of different actors, getting them to work and to work together. It involves identifying resources that can be provided to support the action, strengthening partnerships between those actors, and coordinating the action so that it's coherent and integrated. At the end of all that, something will have happened. Quite often, you'll probably recognise what happens isn't what you intended. There are discoveries along the way. There are sources of energy. Sometimes there are barriers and challenges. And so learning is particularly important as part of this cycle. There are formal styles of learning concerned with monitoring and evaluation, and these are often the requirements of specific projects. But this needs to be much more than a tick box exercise, because the community need to be involved and actions need to be accountable to communities too. Have they really had the desired effect? Have they been worthwhile and valuable from the point of view of the community? Has the action strengthened participation, collaboration and partnerships? All these questions are asked as part of the learning exercise, and they may lead to changes in the way that the next cycle is conducted. For example, in Peru, a growing network of GRIDES organisations capture learning and evaluation locally, and they circulate their experience to other organisations across the country. So they strengthen livelihood resilience locally through peer-to-peer learning. What we've seen here is that CSOs are key players in all these stages, in planning, in implementation and learning, because they have links to the local communities, they build trust with the local communities, they can link together other actors horizontally, locally, business, education, local government, and they can also tap in vertically to information, expertise, policies and plans. That's why they're key players in all stages of the project cycle. We're going to move on now to look at what some of the key success factors are that enable this to happen. So having distilled all that information provided by organisations like yourselves, we get to the heart of the cookbook. This is where there's a huge amount of really valuable practical information in terms of the key ingredients for coherent working and examples of recipes using those ingredients. And we're not going to cover those in detail in these podcasts because there's so much material there. That's exactly why we produced the cookbook. But we're just going to introduce you to those ideas here. So let's turn to these key ingredients. We found 19 of them, but we organised them under 6 headings, 6 key success factors. And I'm just going to introduce those to you now. You'll probably recognise all of them from the case studies we've talked about already. The first is making use of local wisdom and external knowledge. Both are important, and we've seen already how CSOs are key actors in engaging local communities who are often otherwise unheard, but who hold a tremendous amount of important information about local priorities, local experience, local knowledge. Participative activities to gather that information are important, but also tapping into external sources of technical information, other sorts of information, is a role that CSOs are able to play because they can reach out more broadly. And they need to discern what information is valuable locally and how it can be shared and understood locally. And then partnerships, platforms and networks. Different flavours of the same basic idea of collaboration. Strengthening partnerships between local actors who have a concern for development. Local community, local government, local businesses, education, other actors. CSOs are important bridge builders in bringing those partners together. They may need to establish platforms where people gather together, bring different perspectives, bring different concerns, sometimes complementary, sometimes conflicting. The role of a platform is to create a meeting of minds and reach a resolution about ways to move forward. And networks. The idea, as with GNDR, that working together is better than working apart. So linking together people with a common interest, both locally and further afield. We talk also about a key success factor, which is the idea of bouncing forward rather than just bouncing back, because the idea of resilience has sometimes been interpreted as bouncing back from a shock to where you were before. But it's important to think of moving forward. Bouncing forward, strengthening communities, strengthening resilient livelihoods, depends on taking a coherent landscape approach to the whole situation, getting people to own their concerns together, coordinating the different resources, abilities and capacities to move forward, gathering together a shared vision of where people are aiming to move to, and as a result strengthening resilience of livelihood options rather than just maintaining them. Where do the resources come from for implementation? And again, CSOs can be bridge builders to sources of stable long-term funding, always more attractive than short-term project funds, and also need to think about how to diversify funding so that they and the communities they work with aren't vulnerable as a result of just having one source of resources for their activities. All of this depends on the kind of institutional structures and the regulations that determine what can be done. And this is where CSOs play a key role in encouraging and strengthening local organisations, sometimes helping to build new institutions, helping to understand the roles of different organisations and institutions and build bridges where there are gaps in understanding, creating new structures to enable people to work together, whether it's new consortia, new organisations, and linking together different actions to make them coherent. Finally, building resilient livelihoods is often not easy, and it sometimes faces challenges, and those challenges are often the result of underlying pressures, underlying forces which need to be addressed. And so a key success factor is that of building social demand and political influence, because where change is needed, there needs to be the ability to influence for that change. CSOs represent and connect together local communities and can enable them to have a stronger voice in this through advocacy and awareness raising. And they can also understand the legislative barriers and political challenges involved in achieving change and work on ways of addressing those. So these are overall descriptions of the success factors which bracket 19 key ingredients. You can read much more about those in the cookbook. And now we're going to turn to look at the recipes themselves. These are case studies selected from the 73 we gathered, which demonstrate how some of these key ingredients are applied in practice. For all GNDR's Coherence resources and to participate in the Coherence practice group in the community platform, you can go to the web links on the screen now, which will provide you with all the information you need and connect you up to other people working on Coherence.